Welcome to Femin Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portella, and I am so excited to be here for season 3 of XO Kitty. You guys know I love a coming of age story. I don't know what it is about the series that has me in a chokehold because I was really thinking about it compared to the other two series. It's like not as sexy as The Summer I Turned Pretty, which had a lot more sex and sexiness to it. And so did All the Boys I Loved Before, had a little bit more like sexiness to it. I don't know. This one feels so much more chaste and like they're much younger than they actually are. And so it was nice to have this season where they're dealing with some more mature themes of their coming of age story, which I love. I think coming of age stories are such a critical piece of telling a story from a queer feminist lens, that we're getting these younger generations of characters who navigate these conversations about gender and sexuality so differently than my generation, which I'm a millennial, and I feel like millennials handled it just fine. It's nice to see younger generations and younger characters doing it better. I also say like millennials did it fine, and I think that's like predominantly true as far as like my experience with my peers. But I also did theater, and I've mentioned this before, so like everyone I knew was queer and hooking up with each other's. I also think it was like just bred as part of the culture that I was growing up in, and part of my own foundation in a mythos of my own life. So we're diving into season 3 today of XO Kitty. The season came out yesterday. Watched the season twice through. Before we dive into that, let's chat quick about where you can follow the podcast. Subscribe anywhere that you get your podcast. Watch full video breakdowns on YouTube. You can go find cultural analysis over on Substack. You can find community over on Patreon. And of course, you can always follow the podcast on Instagram or TikTok. That's at Fem and Furious Pod. All right, let's dive into today's episode. This is going to be a quickie because the whole season came out. It's 8 episodes. They're 30 minutes each. I'm assuming if you're here, you've listened to my recaps for seasons 1 and 2. If you haven't, fine, you can go do that. This is not going to recap each episode because we're not reviewing anything. We've all just watched it. It happened yesterday. So we're not going to do it based off of that. We will do it based off of theme. And there was some really rich themes that I thought happened in this season. So season 3 of XO Kitty is doing something a little more interesting than I think it might get credit for. And before we even touch on the relationships and the chaos and like the emotional spiral du jour, I just want to start where I always start, which is the feminist lens, because this season at its core is a show about autonomy. And of course, this is impacting everyone on the show, all of the genders on the show. But I think the show explores it best when it is diving into its young women and honestly, all of these characters realizing that their lives are not pre-written or pre-approved, that they're not locked into like one neat compartmentalized tiny little outcome, that there isn't one clear path, that there isn't one clear identity that they are supposed to embody, that there is not just one version of themselves that they are supposed to become. And the real gag is, and the richness of this text throughout the show is realizing that each one of these characters have a choice that is both empowering and also deeply destabilizing, no matter how empowering it is. Like, congrats, you're free. Now what? And actually, that brings me to like a quick femframe moment, because there's a storyline written this season that taps into something that's very real, and I need us to ground into it for just a second before we dive into the chaos that was the rest of the season. And of course, this is part of the chaos. But let's talk about the pregnancy scare that's tied to a missed period for Eunice. let's just say this plainly. Stress can absolutely cause missed or irregular periods, especially for teenagers. When you are a teenager, your hormones are already doing a soft launch into stability at that age. And then when you layer in the emotional stress that comes along with the different aspects of being a teenager, especially at this particular phase in their lives as seniors, where you're looking ahead to what comes next into the unknown. You have relationship drama, you have academic pressure, you have potentially family instability, identity crisis, and on top of all of that, for Eunice in particular, is grappling with a rise in stardom and a sort of shove into the limelight, into the spotlight, that is so overwhelming on top of all of the other things that you're coping with and dealing with as a senior, uh, that just forces her body to respond. And for other teenagers who maybe aren't getting pushed into the limelight, right? Still, even with compounded stress that comes with this era of life that you're in when you're a senior in high school, your body's going to respond. Sometimes that response is literally hitting pause on your cycle. I've been there. I know my friends have been there. I'm sure if you're listening to this and you're someone who menstruates, you might have been there. It is your body trying to regulate and cope with this insane amount of pressure. And of course, for somebody like Eunice, who has this pressure of stardom and now missed her period, which is something that's like regular for teenagers to do anyway, even if they didn't have all of this other compounded stress. Now that's the threat of ruining her career. So, what's interesting and very telling is how quickly the narrative jumps straight into that fear. That pregnancy becomes the immediate conclusion to a natural response that the body may have under copious amounts of stress. And yes, emotionally that tracks, but it also reflects how little nuance is given to exploring these different types of themes within the scope of coming of age stories. And for Eunice in particular, she's a part of the friend group, but we don't really see Kitty interact with her much. And so while I feel like the show does female friendships and girlhood really, really well, I'm missing that connection for Eunice, and in particular in this storyline. It would have been nice to see Eunice talk to another girl about this problem, not just Day, not just Minho, but like talk to another one of the girls that are in this group and get some of their feedback, where like maybe another one of these young women might be like, have you considered its stress? Have you taken a pregnancy test, right? Like the pregnancy test should be the last resort, with all of these other questions coming first. And I wish that we would have had a conversation where Eunice got some of this support that is so great, especially from somebody like Kitty, who is just a naturally supportive to everyone around her friend. I was really, really missing that, but I just think it's so interesting that like that's how quick a narrative will jump to the conclusion of pregnancy. I know that they're adding to the stress and the drama, but at no point did I actually feel hoodwinked by this. Like at no point did I feel that this was Minho's pregnancy at all. So I understand why they do this for the drama, but just like I thought it was really lacking in the exploration of this. We as women or people who menstruate are taught to monitor our periods, track our periods, panic when it's not as we expected it, if it's a little late, if it's a little early, but not actually understand our body's relationship to this thing that happens to us. So something that you have for a majority of your life that you interact with once a month, and like we're not really taught this. And I know that this can come up like later, but I remember the first time I missed my period, I also thought I was pregnant. And I'm not talking about like when I was younger and like it was spotty or like inconsistent or you're like growing into it. I'm talking about once I pretty consistently had my period. The first time I missed my period, I also thought I was pregnant. And the person I was seeing at the time was like, this simply cannot be. You simply don't know enough about your body. And that's not what he said. And obviously he was a man, but even though he was a man telling me that, he was right. And we ended up researching it together. And I was in a production at the time where I was a principal dancer, meaning I was one of the people that on stage was dancing throughout the whole entire production, one of the lead dancers. We had hired a dance coach from Broadway for this particular play. So I was dancing really, really hard. And I always danced for my whole life, but I was dancing at this period of time more than normal and had like lost some weight because of how much I was dancing. And because I was 100 pounds at the time, like who noticed the difference? But we ended up doing some research, my partner and I at the time, we ended up finding that like your period is influenced by the percentage of body fat. And so I think it's like a missed opportunity for a story like this, which explores so many other rich themes, particularly around gender. Missed this opportunity to be able to explore a missed period feeling like a signal versus a pregnancy crisis or a pregnancy scare. So for so many young women, their bodies feel unpredictable, not because they are, but because no one's really explaining this. And now we have TV shows that don't really explain this either. So think about the next time a young woman misses her period and this is a show that she likes, the idea of like stress being the reason why Eunice misses her period is almost thrown away in compared to the drama of the pregnancy scandal and what that does for the relationship between Minho and Kitty. So it would be nice if media dove into this more and explained this more. And that kind of leads me into this idea of control, or more accurately, the illusion of control that is threaded throughout this entire season. So whether it's your body doing something that you didn't expect, your relationship unfolding differently than you imagined, or your future suddenly looking nothing like you thought that you had in your head, this season keeps circling the same question, which is, what do you do when you realize that there is no such thing as control? That there is no such thing as like one simple path and I'm going to walk it forward and that's how it's going to look. All of our characters experience multiple versions of the different paths that are available to them, even when it doesn't feel like it. And how sometimes when you're pushing for one direction, it forces you into another one. And that's a real coming of age moment. So, for example, we have Kitty letting go of control over how things in her list are going to manifest. And we see this like particularly heightened when it comes to the surprise party and her being able to let go of control of how she's envisioned it in her journal and how she wants it to unfold versus like the people that love her and care about her and how they want to come together and actually plan something for her instead. Same thing with her relationship with Minho and how she thought that this relationship might unfold versus all of the insecurity that comes with being with Minho in a way that she didn't really have to explore with Day because they were so far apart. And actually, I would say that at that point in their relationship, though she didn't know it, Kitty's family had more money. It's Yuri and this life that she thought she would always had because she grew up having all of this money, being the most wealthy of all of her classmates, all for it to flip on its head and her having to figure out like how to get a job, right? How to afford her tuition. It's Day who has this incredible connection to Eunice only for her to ghost him at the beginning of the school year. It's for him to be an incredible academic student getting all A's with all of these scholarships, top of his class, only for him to not get into the school of his dreams, and how that forces his hand to say, maybe I'm not going to go into engineering. Maybe I'm going to go and try music because I didn't get that opportunity last year, that golden opportunity that Eunice got. But that doesn't mean that I still can't pursue it if it's something that I'm passionate about. I think a part of what XO Kitty does really well is exploring this idea of this coming of age moment that isn't choosing the right thing. It's realizing that you're allowed to choose and then choose again, or to pivot when things aren't going the way that you thought they might go. And I think the story really does a phenomenal job at exploring that. Now, let's talk a little bit about insecurity, because insecurity is also a big theme of the season. It's doing the absolute most in every single episode, but I actually really appreciate how the show handles it, because it doesn't frame insecurity as failure or as weakness or even as self-sabotage. The show does a really good job of framing insecurity as an age-appropriate exploration, because these are teenagers, and that is a huge part of their active self-discovery. These characters who are not supposed to be so secure in themselves, especially because we've met Kitty in All the Boys I've Loved before, and she was in middle school at that point, a time when I would say you're still young enough to have like freedom. I think for most people, high school is that phase in life where you start to realize the differences between people around you. I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but I think a lot of people. And so like we see Kitty in these movies when she's much younger being much more secure in herself, only to show up at Seoul and feel like she's failing at things. Her relationship with Dae isn't what she thought it was going to be if we're going from season 1. She can't really speak Korean. She's still struggling with it by the end of the season, though she's getting much better at it. And she is discovering all of these things along the way about her mom that she never knew. So there is a part of her that is becoming more secure in all of these pieces of herself that she never had to meet out in the wild before. And for the rest of the group, too, this is true, because they're all in the middle of figuring out who they are in real time. So, of course, they're all spiraling a little bit, and this influences like the height of the drama over the course of the season. What really works, I think, is that everyone's insecurity feels really character specific. When Kitty is experiencing this discomfort or this insecurity, she says it almost immediately. It doesn't take long for her to have a blip in her confidence and then address whoever it is or whatever it is that was making her feel insecure. She's emotionally pure and emotionally honest, almost perhaps to a fault. So Kitty tells Mino that she doesn't feel like she belongs in his world. And this is maybe the longest stretch of like she's holding onto something that she feels really insecure about, because the season starts at the end of last school year, so figure June-ish. They go 3 months without seeing each other. So she's been holding on to that for about 3 months, and figure the season ends around December. So this is before that. We're at like episode 5 when she says to Mino that she's feeling insecure about their relationship and that she doesn't belong in his world. That's the longest that she holds on to something. You know, at the back to school party, as they're walking back to the dorms, she tells him right away, I feel weird that you spent the summer being surrounded by a girl group who, she doesn't say this, when I was last leaving you was like, let's do body shots off of your hot body. Before we had defined whatever this relationship may be. While she's home all summer romanticizing this kiss that they had and hoping that all of these pent up feelings that she had would be reciprocated by Minho upon their reunion, only for him to be caught up in his relationship with Marius. And when he says, like, it's our senior year, I'm getting kind of caught up in some of those details, and she's like, me too, we're running out of time. You can see it play on his face where he's like, oh, she's insecure that this isn't going at a quicker pace because she likes me and she doesn't want to waste this time that we get together. Then she immediately admits that Marius gets in her head. She's like, Marius told me that Gigi was your first love, and I'm feeling a little insecure about that. She admits that she feels like she's getting edged out of her own friend group. When she sees Mino talking to Eunice, she goes over and she says, like, I'm feeling a little insecure about that too. Like, what was that about? So she keeps addressing with Mino that she's not feeling super secure in this relationship. And even if it's not something that he's perpetuating with his behavior, although the Eunice thing is obviously a misunderstanding, but like, even if it's something that he's not intentionally perpetuating with his behavior, she's giving him the keys to understand this vulnerability that she is experiencing. And I wish that he would dig deeper and be like, where is this all coming from? Because by the time we get to her confronting Mino about Eunice being pregnant, she's been compounding all of this stress and lack of clarity and insecurity about their relationship for almost 6 months. And for teenagers, that's an age appropriately long time to be feeling insecure about something and trying your best to be direct, which Kitty consistently tries to do, only to be met with somebody who's not equipped to hold it because he's dealing with insecurities of his own. Mino, in that regard, is also interesting because I don't actually read him as avoidant. Obviously, I don't think many people would read his character as avoidant. I read his character as incredibly overwhelmed and traumatized. His biggest insecurity has nothing to do with Kitty and his relationship with Kitty. He actually feels like that's something that's very solid for him once it's established, right? We have a few moments where he is a little nervous or insecure about it because he's put himself out there to Kitty before. He's been really direct with her, right? At the end of season 1, he's like, I love you a little or maybe a lot, only for Kitty to be like, yeah, what about Day? And sort of reject that. And then to watch Kitty grow into her feelings for him in season 2 as he tries to move on from Kitty. And so for them to end up at the space at the end of season 2 where he's picking up that maybe there's something there, that maybe this is something that she wants to explore, only for her to get insecure and be like, I want to go with you, and then be like, unless you don't want me to, right? She's feeling insecure about it, so he's feeling insecure about it. She invites herself along. He thinks that that means that they want to spend time together, but she invites Q, and then Eunice invites people, and it ends up being a whole group thing. And he says it. He's like, I thought you wanted to spend time with me, and now, like, you invited all of our friends. Like, what's up with these mixed signals? So he addresses his insecurity, I think, with Kitty pretty directly. And once their relationship is established by episode 2, I don't think that he thinks of that something to be insecure about. His insecurity is so much more rooted in his relationship with his father and this ongoing message that he gets from his father and that he digests internally, that he is not enough, not capable, and not somebody who is worthy of being believed in for their potential. She doesn't believe him about the situation with Eunice because he's told these white lies to her, and that's fabricated the situation for her. But she believes in Minho. She doesn't ever waver her support in her belief of him and what he's capable of. And that's where his insecurity spikes. That's his wound. So when Kitty makes this mistake and, doesn't really give him an opportunity and sort of just walks away, I wish that he would soften and be like, she's been really insecure about our relationship this entire time. And he does say that to her. But instead of that being an internal reflection about how they've gotten there and why he hasn't checked in with this sooner, after 1 or 2 incidences, then it takes this big incident for them to have this conversation. I think this could have been a bridge to a much deeper conversation where they could have both supported each other in this idea of being insecure and not finding the other person at fault. The second that Kitty realizes that she's wrong, she goes over to apologize. And Mino can't say, like, I understand that you've been struggling with your insecurity about this. I'm insecure too. This is why this is so hurtful for me that you would say this or that you would believe this about me. Instead, he goes right into shutdown mode. So and Kitty calls him out on this at the end of the season. But it makes me wish that the show had them bond more over the fact that his dad got into both of their heads, because the only reason why Kitty feels that she doesn't belong in Mino's world to begin with is because his dad has put that seed into her mind and it has grown into a freaking jungle over all of this time. And that's where there's a deeper connection that has been like left untouched in their relationship, for her to say, like, your dad really got into my head, and for him to be able to laugh and be like, guess what? My dad also gets into my head. And that could have been a nice bridge for them to heal this insecurity that they are experiencing over their budding relationship together, instead of them, having their insecurities be something that drives a wedge between them, especially because what they're dealing with is age appropriate. This is like age appropriate insecurity. You feel like your boyfriend might like other people, might be attracted to other people. You are insecure about your future, like things that are naturally explored in a coming of age story. You also have Yuri here, whose insecurity is tied to losing her financial stability, which is such a specific and underexplored identity shift. She's not just broke. She then has to go on to question her own capability, which is, who am I without the safety net? Am I actually good at anything? Because before, she had all of these talents, but they were things that she could explore almost as an indulgence because she wasn't worried about her future in the same capacity. Seeing her have to sell off pieces of clothing to be able to afford her tuition, knowing like we still have to pay for next semester's tuition. So she's not even off the hook yet. But we watch her get a job, right? And then we watch her be disappointed by how low the paycheck is and how devastating that is. We her grapple with the stripping of these casual luxuries that she's always had. So when they go to Latte World, and she's like, that's a long line. And Day's like, that's what you do at an amusement park? And she's like, I wouldn't know, because my entire childhood, I've always had somebody that was a concierge that would walk me through and get us in through the VIP entrances. Same thing when she's ironing. It's like she's never ironed something before. So she messes up the dress because she's never had to explore these sort of basic things that people do. And instead of her whining about it or simply just feeling insecure about it, the way that she confronts this insecurity is by doing something about it. So she takes these chances, she takes this job, she takes the opportunity to create her own line, she does the fashion show. So she's willing to put herself out there and try to establish her own legacy and her own path outside of what might have originally felt comfortable because she had the safety net of her father's business. And then layered into all of this, I would say, is a kind of grief that the show never explicitly names, but you can kind of feel it everywhere. It's very palpable and tangible as you go through each and every arc that we get in the course of the season. And the grief isn't over people or a specific or direct loss. It's this grief over different versions of yourself. It's a transition grief, really. Kitty is grieving the idea that she would come to Kiss and magically figure out who she was. And now she's running out of time, so to speak. I say that in air quotes, because she still doesn't have a clear answer. This question that she has to write for NYU, which is like, who are you? And she says to LJ, like, hello? I don't know. I don't even know if I like who I am right now. Meanwhile, LJ is also grieving a life that she thought she would have because her relationship with Peter isn't currently working out, and you have Yuri who's grieving not just her old life, but all of the certainty that came with it. You have Marius and Q in many ways grieving over the shared experience that they had and how that helped them understand themselves better. And this kind of grief can be tricky because things are supposed to transition, especially when you're 18. You're looking at a bunch of transitions in front of you. You're going to be going to a different school with different people. You're not going to have all of your friends near you. You're not going to be living with your family. It's a type of grief that's much harder to get closure from because when you are grieving possibilities, different paths of potential that you might have taken. So, for example, one of the things that comes up is Kitty mourning this idea of potentially staying in Seoul. The second that she decides to apply to NYU, early decision is committing to the school if she gets in. And that means that there's something that she's giving up that was a path of potential, and that would be staying in Seoul and exploring her relationship with Mino in whatever capacity that would look like. So it's hard to get closure from something that never fully existed in the first place, or hard to get closure from something that is already supposed to organically transition at this phase in their lives. But what the season does really well is that it's very pro honesty, which I think is such a beautiful, beautiful message. All of these characters are honest about their experience of grieving and transitioning. Kitty is honest, Yuri is honest, Dae is honest, Jin's honest, Mino's honest, or at least Mino is honest eventually. The show has always relied upon these little white lies or lies of omission or misunderstandings that all eventually get resolved, but that act as like the central tension point for the show. And I think one of the most beautiful messages that the show could like offer young people is that honesty isn't a shortcut, but that it will fix things eventually, even if it doesn't fix things immediately. There is a lag. There is an uncomfortable in between where everything feels a little bit more messier before it's resolved. So for LJ, we get this tension point of her not knowing what's going to happen with Peter, and we're 5,000 miles away, literally. And, you know, emotionally, you have Kitty telling Q to beat Marius at his own game by confessing everything that he needs to confess to Jin, and he doesn't, and that blows up in his face, and then that impacts the relationship between Kitty and Q for a few episodes. You have Kitty being honest about her feelings with Minho twice, essentially, like once in the beginning of the season and then sort of once in the middle of the season where she apologizes for getting it wrong, and Mino shuts her out after that. And then you have Mino having to come through his messy middle in order to want to share his feelings with Kitty by the end of the season and tell her that he loves her. So I think it's a really important portrayal because we're so used to honesty being framed as an instant fix, but it's not a shortcut. There are consequences to these actions, but I think that those conversations are some of the most beautiful, particularly when it comes to like Q's relationship. This conversation that Q has with his mom about his mom not getting it all right, and the choices that she wishes that he would make for himself and that she sees for him. You know, you have Q then being honest with Marius that like, we've walked this path before and this isn't what I want. Being honest with Jin to say, I was confused because of all of these things that have happened, because I'm a 17-year-old boy, and that's normal. You know, I was confused about all of these things that happened, but like, I'm not confused anymore. Jin being like, I'm open to that conversation, and then backtracking when he gets more information, and then coming forward again and being like, I'd love to make you grovel, but I just think we're gonna have to like hold each other's hands and like figure this out, and I'm gonna figure some things out on my own, but we'll have to like work through this together. And like this idea of there's work to be put in to healing something, to fixing something, but that the honesty is the first step in that process. And I think the show does that really well. Let's talk about safety in the show too, because if you're looking for a safe option this season, you're not going to find one. Every single character is pushed out of their comfort zone. And this goes into that exploration of autonomy that we were talking before. So Kitty deliberately chooses NYU. I thought that was beautiful. I thought that was such a profound decision for her after falling in love with it, especially after Jiwon mentions not once but twice that Kitty's way too wrapped up in her relationship with Minho to be thinking clearly about some of the other decisions that she has to make. And in fact, this was one of the most interesting conversations that we get in the aquarium. So if you've watched All the Boys I've Loved Before, going on themes of honesty and like messy middles and the truth will come out and it will be the path forward. In To All the Boys I Loved Before movie, where they're at the Portland Aquarium and LJ and Peter are standing in front of the fish tank, the jellyfish tank. And in the movie, LJ is feeling really insecure about their relationship because she's not like Jen and she's really not like Peter either. Peter is popular, he's a jock, and Jen is cool and all these things that when LJ compares herself to her, she feels very different and alternative to Jen. And Jen being like somebody who was an antithesis, to what LJ and Chrissy stand for in this first movie. So it ends up coming out that Peter is spending time with Jen. There's, obviously like same thing like there is with Minho. There's like logistical reasons for why that's happening. And yet LJ feels insecure about it. And in this conversation, that they're having about her insecurities about their relationship and do you want me to be more like Jen, comes a conversation where this big romantic moment that they had in the first movie, LJ finds out that he was actually waiting for Jen in that moment. And that changes how she perceives their relationship and only heightens the experience that she's having over their insecurity. And so that same song plays. The song that's playing in that moment between LJ and Peter is this song called Moral of the Story by Ashe. I don't know. Sorry to the artist. I don't know who you are. So I guess because in that storyline, there is sort of like a misconception or like a lie or a mistruth that sort of gets unraveled. I don't know. There's that song then plays again, but it has nothing to do with Minho. It actually is in this moment that Kitty has with Jiwon. And I just thought it was an interesting callback to that song, especially when it's relating to the idea that it would call back to these lyrics, especially because the lyrics that play are some mistakes get made, that's all right, that's okay. In the end, it's better for me. That's the moral of the story, babe. So this idea that mistakes are going to get made, but that's all right, that's okay, because in the end, it's all going to be fine, right? Kitty choosing then to go to NYU in a sort of choose myself moment felt really profound to me, and I just really love that. We have Minho, who is forced out of his dad's company, gets fired from his dad's company, and then chooses to pursue production because he liked it and he was good at it, and ends up producing 2 really cool songs, one for Yuri's fashion show and one for Kitty for her 18th birthday. Day doesn't get into SNU, which everyone around him is like, it's a given. That's where you're going to get into. Like, don't even worry about it. And so he pivots to music, something that he's passionate about, and he gets into this with his best friend. Yuri loses her financial stability and finds herself in fashion in this riches to rags, right? Exploration and fashion line. Jiwon chooses independence away from her alimony, and it completely alters her life because she falls in love and she ends up getting pregnant. LJ sends the manuscript, even though that didn't feel safe at first. Q chooses to repair things with Jin after exploring what things might be with Marius. Eunice decides to completely walk away from fame. And in the same vein, Mino choosing not to hold his friend and somebody who just went under an incredible amount of duress, that she missed her period and thought she was pregnant, him choosing her essentially, and what is right, the thing that is right, which is to not hold this young woman to a contract in order to impress his dad, is the very thing that gets him fired. But him getting fired is the very thing that opens the door to what comes next, or what could be coming next. Some of these I think are intentional, some of them are reaction, but all of them are growth that happens through discomfort. All right, we have a few more things to touch on. Let's talk about girlhood as an infrastructure, because if there's one thing that Kitty is, it is a girl's fucking girl. Even when she's feeling insecure about Gigi, she's like, why did Mino have a crush on her? Who wouldn't have a crush on her? She's so cool. She's feeling so insecure in that moment, and yet she still recognizes Gigi's freaking awesome. Yeah, I hope there's more Gigi next season, because I really liked her character. But through all of the instability that happens this season, the thing that consistently holds everything together is girlhood. Sometimes that's friendship, sometimes it's between the sisters. And we have some Margot in season 1. She's mentioned, right? She's a part of the plot line. But we get this really strong pulse between LJ and Kitty this year, which was really nice to see. The girlhood in the show is, I would say, the infrastructure. It's the packaging. LJ calls Kitty and is like, I'm having problems with Peter. And Kitty, no qualms, no questions asked, split decision, is like, I'm going to New York to spend time with my sister who needs me. Kitty then goes through a breakup. She calls LJ and she's like, I need you. I need my sister. LJ books a ticket and is in Seoul within 18 hours. No questions asked, baking cookies for her sister. When Yuri is like, I can't afford tuition, Kitty immediately steps in and helps her. When Kitty is spiraling about Mino, Yuri is the one that pulls her back, and she's like, babe, Mino is crazy about you. You need to maybe ask some questions before you go right into chaos queen mode. LJ and Kitty just completely show up for Jiwon when they discover that she's pregnant. They sort of, Kitty in the very funny scene where she's like, I'm not trying to say that you aren't pregnant, but we found a pregnancy test, and I just want to let you know that if you are, we are here to support you. The fact that they can just rally around Jiwon, that they've developed this relationship with their extended family this way. The show consistently has girls who are in healthy relationships with each other and who are showing up for each other, and that these are just as important and valuable as the romantic relationships in the show, if not even more valuable. They're reinforcing the character sense of self within the dynamics of these girlhood and sisterhood and friendship. The show also does a really good job at exploring queerness as a process. It's done this since season 1, and it continues to do it this season, and I love it. It's one of the most yummy bits of the show. And Q's storyline is such a clear example of the different stages of the emotional readiness that people might experience in their queer journey. So Q has this complicated history with Marius, who represents that timing didn't work, that there wasn't the right emotional maturity, that there's maybe even some unresolved feelings. And then you have Q's relationship with Jin, who represents growth and courage and the willingness to show up fully even when it's hard, because Jin's journey in particular is really powerful. Going from somebody who was clearly struggling with his queer identity last year, the fact that he was so overtly homophobic in their track team, only for him to be at the queer club and for him and Q to be two people that were sneaking around, to being somebody who, like he says this season, was completely willing to change himself and go public and be vulnerable and be committed with Q. And Q choosing Jin by the end of the season isn't about choosing love, really. It's about choosing somebody who was ready at the same time as you, because Q and Marius hooked up, and Q has these unresolved feelings because it was the first person that he hooked up with, right? Okay, we get it. We've all been there. But when Q confronts Marius about the fact that he was ready for a relationship when Marius was still dating a girl and was still unsure about his sexuality and what he was feeling, Q was like, that's all fine and dandy, but you made a choice, and that choice was to ghost me for a year. You didn't want to be with me, you weren't ready, and that's fine, but I deserve to be with somebody who's ready, and Jin made that choice. And so like we've walked this path before, and we've ended up in the same place, and like what's really changed, And Marius, to his credit, is like, I've changed, I decided. But Q is essentially like, I needed you to decide that a year ago. I wanted this with you a year ago. Now I've got somebody who was willing to take this chance with me, and I don't want to ruin a good thing for the potential of something that I've already maybe attempted. Not everybody gets a clean coming out story, and the show doesn't pretend or dance around queer identity in any capacity. We have, Kitty as our resident bisexual. We have, Yuri trying to get back out there, the complicated relationship between Pravina and Juliana this season, sort of a subplot, I would say, even compared to Q and Marius. And but the show doesn't shy away from queerness and like the different explorations of queer identity, and I thought the way that they did it this season around timing and not being ready to come out, and how that discrepancy in time between two people being ready to come out or even sure about their sexuality, where Q, it seems, was a lot more comfortable in his sexuality before Marius was, that these things can like influence the future of a relationship, what people feel that they deserve within the context of a relationship. Now, I do need to be a little bit critical, because this pregnancy storyline opens up a bigger issue, which is the absence of Yuri in Alex's life this season. The fact that they basically have no meaningful interaction since season 1. They had like 1 or maybe 2 conversations in season 2, when that's her brother in a show that is built around family and identity. This feels less like a character choice and much more like a writing gap. Same with the absence of Gina. There are threads that we were introduced to in season 1 with intention that were very rich thematically, especially with these adult plot lines, especially with this merging of a new family between Professor Lee and Gina and Alex and Yuri, and what that dynamic could look like, only for Alex to become pregnant, to go meet Jiwon and Kitty and their harmony. Well, not Kitty's harmony, but to meet Jiwon's harmony and then be like, I want us to be a family, and not have Professor Lee or Yuri there, or not tell Yuri at all that like he's having a baby, feels like a swing and a miss to me, like a complete swing and a miss. It would have even been nice to see Alex be somebody that Yuri could go to as she's struggling with this change in her financial status. Her brother in this newfound family that she's got is nowhere to be seen, and like could have helped her financially, maybe even a little. I'm not saying that he needed to pay for her tuition, but she doesn't even feel like she can go to him for help. She doesn't even feel like she can go to him to, I don't know if she feels that way or not, because she doesn't even seem to think twice about Alex this season. But like doesn't even seem to be a character that she can go and start to work through things emotionally with. She only seems to have her friends. I really felt the absence of Gina again too. And for a show that's so focused on emotional continuity and ancestry and heritage, the absence of these characters, or the absence of the relationship between these characters, is so noticeable. My last little note is, and this is deeply unserious, LJ's NYC apartment really just sent me through the fucking roof, especially as somebody who lives 25 minutes from Manhattan. That is not a college, struggling, first job apartment in New York City. 500 square feet in Manhattan is like a bajillion dollars. So this apartment that she has with these like built-in bookshelves and this exposed brick, it makes zero sense, but I would like to access this level of delusion or whatever job she's got that has allowed her to get this apartment. All right, let's crack open our burn book where we will look at the superlatives for this episode, the Bold and Bothered Award. This is strictly for the Femme and the Furious. It is the moment or the quote that relays the most feminine rage. And this was not really rage, but I just thought that this was such a beautiful line that was fueled by the spirit of this award. And that is when Kitty says, I make mistakes. I'm a person who makes mistakes. I just thought this line was beautiful. I thought it was brilliant. And I love that there is such a rich emotional text to this idea that Kitty is not somebody who is perfect, that people should not demand perfection out of her, least of all her partner. And I really loved it. Okay, the Shiro Award. This award goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring or the moment that is the most empowering. And I thought this was the Riches to Rags fashion show and Yuri finding her style and really emphasizing that within the fashion that she displays. The Femme Fatale Award for the most smash the patriarchy moment of the episode. This goes to Kitty applying early decision to NYU for her own plot. She's doing it for her own vine, okay? And not for the sake of her future with Mino. Speak Your Truth trophy, the best line. This is a silly one, but welcome to the Eunice K-popalypse. I thought this was so funny both times around when I watched it. I was like, that is a really funny line. The writers of that line should feel very proud of themselves. And then the honorary heartthrob, because I'm just a girl, okay? And I want to talk about the most swoon-worthy moments. And for me, this was when Jin stood up for Q to his mom at Chuseok. When he's like, Q is amazing. He's kind. He's smart. Like, he stands up for him. And how moving that ends up being for Q's mom to watch and witness. So I love that. All right. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Femme and Furious. If you like this episode, comment, rate, or leave a review, please. I will be back on Tuesday. We are finishing Binding 13, Boys of Tommen. So if you've been following along with those episodes, we are going to do an episode similar to today where we will just go through the end of the book and themes instead of going by chapter, because there's going to be a lot more to cover. And until then, don't freeze your butts off in Portland. Bye!